Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our session today. My name is Rami and I work for the University of Southampton as a country development manager for the Middle East. Today, colleagues are going to be joining us from the Faculty of Law. Obviously, thank you for BEB for organizing this amazing event. And thank you for my colleagues as well from the Faculty of Law for joining us today. Let me briefly introduce my colleagues. Professor Uta Kohol, a professor of commercial law and director of our PGT programs. If you can wave there for people to know you. We have Dr. Alexandros Notovas, he's an associate professor of maritime law at the University of Southampton, and Dr. Philip Simovic, a lecturer in maritime law. And they will be talking today, and myself obviously from the International Office, and they'll be briefly talking about maritime law and our department. So thank you very much all for attending. Uta, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rami. Can you just take us back to the previous slide? Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to talk to you. We'll be giving you a very small taste of what it might be like to study maritime law at Southampton University, and we will be taking you to the implications of the pandemic on shipping and shipping law, and also reflect on the implications of Brexit on maritime law. So these are two very, very current, very topical issues which some of our colleagues have been looking at. I'm myself not a maritime lawyer, but I am a commercial lawyer, and I teach international commercial litigation on the maritime law course. Next slide, please. So I will be talking to you a little bit very briefly about the law school. Then I will hand over to Alexandros, who will reflect on the pandemic, and then to Philip, who will be talking about Brexit. So Southampton Law School. Now we have a fairly long-standing tradition of welcoming Turkish students at Southampton Law School. We have always had quite a few Turkish students doing our maritime LLM. As probably quite a few of you know, Southampton Law School is well known for its long history of providing maritime law education and research. More generally, we belong to the Russell Group universities, that are 24 sort of top universities of the UK, and as well as on a continual basis, we have been getting into the top 20 universities in the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guides. Now, why is that? Because these guides and these rankings basically take into account of how seriously we take our research and how seriously we take our teaching. Lots of our teaching is research-led, so you will be taught by experts in the field, and student satisfaction has always been very important to us, so we listen to students. A lot of our teaching is interactive, and there is, as you may or may not know, we also have a personal tutor system where you get pastoral care and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, now, so this is again about Southampton Law School and basically talking about the teaching. We encourage the teaching there will be a fair bit of independent teaching expected from you, but we also, of course, have lots of interactive classes. You will also have the opportunity to participate in mood, to speak to practitioners and so on. Yes, lecturers are important, but the student cohort itself is also integral, of course, to the whole teaching and learning experience. So our postgraduate cohort is actually exceptionally international. we get students from the whole world, and I've been at the law school for about 3 years, and I've had great fun teaching postgraduate students who bring very different cultural, academic, or even sometimes industry experience to the course, which no doubt enriches the course as well. So the course really lives from the variety and the experience of the student cohort, as well as the staff who will lead you through it. Next slide, please. Rami? Okay, thank you. So that's it. Okay, now this is a more of a technical slide here, but it links, I suppose, it links to the earlier slides insofar as our reputation is one that we are producing quality postgraduates, quality, postgraduates who will be joining the legal profession and the maritime industry. And so for that reason, actually, our entry requirements are fairly high. So we are expecting to have of our students that they have a good law degree or equivalent. Yeah, so sometimes students come to us who have a lot of industry experience, or students who have studied business, but with a major law component. And as long as we see that you have the academic caliber, we are happy to accept you. You see their links, and I think these PowerPoint slides will be made available to you later on. So about the conversion of what we call a 2-1 degree, what that means in the Turkish context, I don't know at this moment, but there are sort of conversion tables where you can check what you will need to join the degree. And of course, you need to have a fairly strong level of English, both written and oral. I think, next slide, Rami. There's one more practical slide. This is about living in Southampton. Southampton is near the water. It's very close to London, actually. Lots of people. Basically, that's an attraction of Southampton, that you don't have the high prices of London universities, where, of course, accommodation and so on is very expensive, but you are just outside the capital. So it's an hour's ride, train ride to the capital, but of course Southampton itself has a fair bit to offer, both in terms of student life, but also in terms of its location near the sea, and it's fairly good weather by British standards. I believe that ends the sort of practical introduction to our course. I will now hand over to my colleague Alexandros Dovas, who will give you a taste of taste of maritime law in the particular context of the pandemic. Over to you, Alexandros.
Thank you so much, Professor Cole. Good evening to all. Rami, I would like to use your help to go one slide back, because I would like to take over from the last point, that Southampton, not this one, the next one, no, the next one. This is it. Thank you. So I would like to take on by the last point regarding Southampton being a rich port in history town. And I would like to do so by reflecting on 2002, the previous year, which was quite challenging in terms of the unexpected advent of the pandemic, and how it has impacted on human element. And also to reflect as 2002 had been considered to be the first year of an exceptional decade ahead in terms of the new technology that it would usher. And with that in mind, I would like to combine the pandemic, the human element, but also the advent soon of what we call autonomous vessels and technology. And these aspects are topics that are being considered currently in Southampton Law School and more specifically in the Institute of Maritime Law. So Rami, if you would like to give me the full slide for that. So while it's true that Southampton had some Roman and Saxon inhabitants, the city first came to be an important port when the Normans arrived in the first century of the millennium, serving as the main connection to the lands in Normandy and the south of France. The Bar Gate, and you can see here part of the medieval walls that are still in good condition, most of them at the moment in the center of the High Street, was built as the main entrance to the medieval walled town and has been just as probably the finest and certainly the most complex town gateway in Britain at this point, although compared to other parts of UK, Southampton has not retained the full history in that sense. Much of the medieval city walls also still survive, together with the vaults where the merchants stored their goods. And I would like at this point to start my narrative by a small west gate which stands still in these walls, and you can see the gates. On the left side of the slide is how it looks now. On the right hand side, it was how it was depicted on an engrave in the 17th century. Now, while taking a walk in April 2002, almost a year ago, I was led to this part of the medieval walls of Southampton on the esplanade next to the West Gate, which was one of the town's principal gates in the medieval period, as it led directly onto the West Quay, the town's only and still remain the only commercial quay. The gate symbolizes two important events, although the second of them that I will refer to, and I will start my discussion, is much less recounted in the history. The first one, as you can see on the ornamental plate, it was the gate that the army of the Henry V marched to the ships for the Battle of Azincourt in 1415. This was proved to be a decisive battle in the 100 Years' War that resulted in the victory of the English over the French, and actually also signified the dominance of the British Empire over the seas. And we had that era, the predominance of the shipping, British maritime law to become slowly as the international maritime language. The second one, it has to do with the fact that this was the gate that was crossed by the Pilgrim Fathers embarked from West Quay on the Mayflower ship on August 15, 400 years ago. The group of English colonists who settled in North America and later become known as the Pilgrim Fathers originated as a group of Puritans from Nottingham and Lincoln. After leaving Southampton in August, the Mayflower moved to Plymouth, and on September 16, the same year, the Mayflower ship sailed from Plymouth to England. The ship was headed for Virginia. However, stormy weather and navigational errors forced the Mayflower off course, and on November 21st, the Pilgrims reached Massachusetts, where they founded the first permanent European settlement in New England in the United States. So I will come from this starting point to conclude also my brief narrative. So Rami, would you like to move on to the next slide? Now, this era, exactly when it was when we had the spread and the first maritime laws to deal with the contagious and infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are caused by microscopic germs, such as bacteria or viruses, that get into your body and cause problems. Some, but not all, infectious diseases spread directly from one person to another. Infectious diseases that spread from person to person are contagious, and this is where we will go with COVID-19. The virus, it is now escalated to a full-scale pandemic. It was classed as such on February last year, and still we are grappling with its tremendous effects. But in history, we have already known at least 28 other pandemics, including, for example, smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, HIV, cholera, yellow fever. All these have been pandemics. Some other, which are interwoven into the SIPPing history, are more known to those that have a SIPPing interest. For example, malaria, Ebola, and the bubonic plague. The latter one being better known as the Black Death, a name that was given to it during its largest outbreak in the 14th century, which resulted in more than 50 million losses, estimating at the time the 1/5 of Europe's population at the time. In October 1347, arrived by Genovese trading ships in Europe, and in August the next year, the first reported cases were documented in the port of Bristol. The pandemic carried on for almost 2 decades, which I hope it will not be ominous for our case as well. And a second national outbreak for the UK, it was recorded in 1361, causing the loss of 20% of the British population. This was the era in the 14th century where we had in Europe the first established institutionalized systems of quarantine, giving to the government the power to detain ships, cargoes, passengers, and crew, and impose to the ship the obligation to lay at anchor for 40 days before landing, as the name suggests, 40 days as a precautionary measure. Rami, to the next slide, please. Until the 17th century, which was when the Mayflower that I mentioned in the beginning of my narrative departed from England to the United States, most governments around the world have instituted maritime quarantine centers, and the domestic legislation have been enacted, laws forbidding ships and the human element on board from entering the ports, and without a preliminary medical examination, pretty much what we will be doing soon in relation to the air travels. For example, in 1647, 20 years after the Mayflower reached the United States, the infectious diseases in mind at the time, the yellow fever and the plague, officials in Boston drew up an ordinance requiring all arriving ships to pause at the harbor entrance or risk a hefty monetary fine. In 1879, and this is where the drawing of my slide leads to, amid concerns about yellow fever, the United States Congress established the National Board of Health, in part to assume responsibility for quarantine in cases where states' actions have proven ineffective. The kind of assisted emigrant we cannot afford to admit. So reads the caption to this pack drawing, which shows member of the New York Board of Health welding a bottle of carbolic acid, a disinfectant, as we use these days in their attempts to keep cholera at bay. Note the fez, a connotation broadly of the Levant and the Orient origination of these kind of epidemics on the skeleton being on board a British ship. And you can see the flag on the ship, which purportedly carries on the pandemic to the United States. At the time, the United Kingdom had been considered the main transit of the commercial vessels and merchant vessels to the United States. Next to the next slide, this is pretty much the situation about maritime law and shipping interests today. Nothing has changed. We do have immediate impact on charter parties regarding demurrage, lay time, delays, and also a number of safe port and berth warranties today back to this era. For example, as we talk today about the coronavirus pandemic, we do have just another endemic, a contagious disease outbreak regarding Ebola in the West Africa. And the same rules apply to the carriage of goods, insurance that date back to this kind of history. To some extent, nevertheless, although we have been so many centuries within the fight to the pandemic, and more specifically this year, having a pandemic at full scale, what it has not been yet addressed, it is the human element. We all know about the case, for example, of the Diamond Princess, the luxury cruise ship being moored in the port of Yokohama with almost 4,000 people on board that not being allowed to disembark in Japan. And at the time, the cruise ship, the human element, posed a very important danger to Japan, in the sense that at the time we had, on the one hand, on board the ship, almost 542 positive cases of COVID, while on the other hand, on shore, for the whole of Japan at the time, there were only 72 cases. The pandemic, the continuing pandemic also has demonstrated something that we have not yet responded effectively, and this is the human element when it comes to commercial shipping. It will be important to know that we do have over 1.6 million of seafarers being stranded on ships, with numerous cases to be known today that we have cruised on vessels for more than 80 months. And on the next slide, this concern was documented at the highest level by the IMO Secretary General to considering the issue. Crew fatigue during a global pandemic and the repercussions on vessels seaworthiness has been one of the most important and pressing issues, although we now have 1 year into the pandemic. With up to 400,000 crew members stranded as of today, either at sea or at lay ports due to travel restrictions. Many crews have worked several months beyond their contracts, exceeding regulatory limits, and the industry has sounded the alarm amid concerns. The shipping industry has stealthily imposed a no crew change clause, which means that ship owners are not permitted to change over their crews, which has impacted the mental sanity, the health conditions of the seafarer, but also the vessel safety in terms of international navigation, something that very recently the IMO Secretary General castigated as being unacceptable. So where we go from that? And I thought while I was walking and just working on these kind of the medieval walls that most probably more than ever now we need to incorporate the modern technology. And on the next slide, you will see a project which is called the Mayflower Project 2020. This is an unmanned solar and wind powered vessel that was to be launched in time for the 400th anniversary of its namesake journey Mayflower from Plymouth, to coincide with the historical journey of the Pilgrim Fathers. In September 2002, Mayflower was to embark on its voyage to follow the same exactly course, but that's about the only thing the two ships will have in common. This is a highly innovative project and the world's first full-sized and fully autonomous unmanned ship to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. It was officially launched at a naming ceremony in Plymouth this year, and you can, Rami, move on to my last slide in order to keep with the date, and you can see the vessel on the water ready once the pandemic allows to embark on its journey. Pandemics have been historically interwoven in shipping, and the 2002 landmark year has highlighted the need to support new technologies that are geared towards remote and autonomous operations, as will be less exposing to the vulnerability of the human elements. Nevertheless, as you can see, new technologies and the experimentations have not get away from the pandemic, as we do have delays. Nevertheless, we do believe that the future will lie in the use of modern technologies, and there have been a number of new applications to characterize the 2002, the miraculous decade, the starting of the miraculous decade ahead. And these developments are led with those at the front of autonomous and remotely controlled vessels. Nevertheless, as a final reflection on the pandemic and the expected takeoff of the technology in the shipping industry, we need to take into account the paradox. And the paradox is that as much as we rely on modern technology, more reliance is expected on the human element in order to drive through these technologies to make it safe and secure. But nevertheless, as we have seen through the pandemic and the course of events, the incorporation of the new technology in shipping will be inevitable in order to avoid situations like that described by the IMO Secretary General in relation to practices that have an undermining effect on the human elements. Now, all these matters, the technology as well as the human elements, are things that the Institute of Maritime Law within the law school is currently pursuing. And I hope that I got your interest to come and see closer these medieval settings. If you wish to undertake your LLM maritime law in Southampton. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. And well, actually, I think no presentation on English law can actually pass nowadays without Brexit being mentioned at some point. And I think this part of the conversation sort of confirms that. Well, I teach sort of a number of maritime subjects on the LLM and also on the LLB. And one of my favorite areas is private international law. And I will actually tell you why private international law, with which some of those rules you may already be familiar with from your bachelor degree. But the reason why they're so important for maritime contracts and why this area is absolutely essential to do in your LLM is because of this statistic, roughly 80% of all disputes which are litigated in London's commercial court involve at least one party who is domiciled in a foreign jurisdiction, that is outside of England and Wales. There is another actually statistic which is quite interesting, in that over 50% of disputes which are litigated in the commercial court have both parties in litigation who are domiciled abroad. So, for example, a Turkish defendant and a Russian claimant. So over 50% involve both parties who are foreign, and that's quite a substantial number of cases. And that, I think, these statistics confirm that London is rightly sort of seen as the center for resolution of international commercial and maritime litigation. And private international, that is why private international law is important. The rules of private international law could be essentially described as follows. They are rules designed to deal with cases involving a foreign element or cross-border litigation, all of these cases that I mentioned. And in maritime contracts and those disputes which arise from those contracts, they invariably involve a foreign party or some foreign element. So you are bound to sort of, in practice, as a shipping lawyer, you will encounter the rules of private international law. And they deal with three main areas. They deal with jurisdiction. So who has jurisdiction? English courts or a foreign court? Which law do we apply to a maritime contract? Do we apply English law? Do we apply Turkish law if there is a, for example, foreign element linking the case or dispute to Turkey? And finally, if we have a judgment, for example, from a foreign court, such as a Turkish court, how would that judgment be recognized and enforced in English courts? And the reason why you may wish to enforce a Turkish judgment in the English courts is because the assets of the defendant may be located in England, or security for the claim is located in England, such as a ship, for example, which has been arrested in an English port. So important pre-trial security, of course, the arrest of ships. So this is what conflict of laws rules, as English lawyers describe them, or private international law rules, deal with. And Brexit has had a particularly radical impact on the rules of private international law. And the reason for that goes back to the sources of those rules in English law. The sources of the rules of jurisdiction pre-Brexit, essentially, before 1st of January of this year, were essentially the EU regulation on jurisdiction called the, well, commonly known as the recast Brussels I regulation. That regulation, in the vast majority of cases, determined the how to establish jurisdiction in English courts in any cross-border litigation. And this regulation applied generally to civil and commercial matters, but it included maritime disputes. There was no restriction in terms of coverage of maritime cases. in the event that, of course, that a dispute is outside the scope of the EU regulation, the recast regulation, disputes were about jurisdiction were resolved in accordance with the common law rules of jurisdiction, English national law rules of jurisdiction. Now, the impact of Brexit, essentially, putting it very simply, is that since 1st of January 2021 of this year, any disputes which are commenced in English courts which have a foreign element, the jurisdiction dispute will be resolved in accordance with English national law rules of jurisdiction, or common law rules. So the EU recast regulation on jurisdiction is no longer applicable to disputes commenced since 1st of January. There's a more sort of complicated matter which students, of course, learn about the EU recast regulation, because a lot of maritime disputes that shipping lawyers deal with today have been commenced before 1st of January. And during the transitional period in between the referendum and the Brexit date, we had the EU rules still applicable. So lots of cases in English courts still concern the EU recast regulation. Now, both academic commentators, and I think even more so legal practitioners, I would say have had a sort of quite a knee-jerk reaction about the impact of Brexit. And in particular, they talked about the negative impact of Brexit on London as a litigation centre. In short, as I said, the statistics tell us that London is clearly a international litigation centre for resolution of international disputes, both maritime and commercial more generally. But will Brexit bring a reduction in the number of cases going to the courts in London? Well, I would be sort of very critical about those reactions. And my personal sort of perspective is that it is simply not true to say that English judgments from English courts will no longer be recognized and enforced in EU member states. That's an overreaction from many commentators, and I will explain why when I move on to the next slide. And also, the other question is it true that there is no incentive to include English jurisdiction agreements and English governing law clauses in maritime contracts? And the short answer to that is no. Well, essentially, there is still a lot of incentive to litigate in London, to include English jurisdiction agreements. And there is still a quite high likelihood that those jurisdiction clauses and choice of law clauses will be enforced in other EU member states. Now, if I could move on to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons why essentially commercial and maritime claimants and parties will continue to include English jurisdiction clauses is because of the relevance of the Hague Convention on Choice of Court Agreements 2005. Now, this is an international convention which essentially seeks to, between the contracting states of the convention, to uphold exclusive jurisdiction agreements in commercial contracts. So anything that is of civil and commercial matter, including an exclusive jurisdiction agreement, provided that certain formality requirements specified by this convention have been complied with. So provided we have a qualifying exclusive jurisdiction agreement. And the relevance of the 2005 Hague Convention on Choice of Court Agreements is that the UK has actually acceded to the convention in its own right. So from 1st of January of this year, the UK is essentially a member of this convention and applies this convention in the same way as any other contracting states. Now, one of the problems with the Hague Convention on Choice of Court Agreements is its sort of limited coverage. And that also applies to the number of states which have successfully ratified this convention. The contracting states of the Hague Convention are currently the whole of the European Union, so that includes all of the EU member states, Mexico, Singapore, and Montenegro. So importantly, the convention has been signed, but it hasn't been ratified yet by the United States and also by China. It doesn't apply to European Free Trade Association's countries such as Norway and Switzerland. So there's a very limited geographical coverage. And for an exclusive jurisdiction agreement to be upheld as being valid and for it to be given effect to under the convention, it has to nominate the courts of one of the contracting states. Another problem, especially for maritime claimants, is that the convention actually contains some important exclusions. The Hague Convention excludes some important maritime contracts, and in particular contracts for carriage of goods by sea and carriage of passengers. So if the Hague Convention does not apply and we have an English judgment, will that judgment be recognized and enforced in other EU states? This is something our students explore. Well, the sort of quick answer to that is that the local law rules in, for example, Germany and France will be applicable. And a shipping lawyer working in London would have to get advice from a German lawyer or a French lawyer to see whether that judgment will be recognized and enforced. However, there's no need for skepticism in that those rules are more straightforward than most claimants seem to think. So an English jurisdiction agreement will of course be recognized under the Hague Convention, but if not, there are local rules to enable that as well. Also, there's no need for any negativity about the fact that the EU recast regulation is no longer applicable in the UK for, as I said, disputes commencing from 1st of January. The common law rules of jurisdiction provide many benefits. They are very flexible rules, and many of the practitioners and commentators take the view that the English common law rules of jurisdiction are more suitable, they're better suited to high-value maritime disputes, to maritime litigation. That sort of inherent flexibility in the common law and the ability of the common law to develop organically from case to case is a key benefit of those rules of jurisdiction. They are very discretionary, and although that has been criticized for possibly bringing a lot of uncertainty to the resolution of maritime disputes, nevertheless, again, my own perspective is that there is actually a community of understanding among English judges and English shipping lawyers as to how to apply common law rules of jurisdiction. So for them to give advice, clear advice to their clients is possibly considerably more straightforward than some of the articles would seem to suggest. So yes, it's on their discretionary rules, but the judges and the practitioners know very well how to apply them. They focus on cost effectiveness of the disputes, a very important consideration in maritime disputes, and also on fair and full access to justice. Okay. You may also be wondering whether arbitration is a safer choice, and it may well be for some maritime parties that arbitration actually gives a lot more certainty, and that is simply because the 1958 New York Convention on Recognition and Enforcement of Arbitral Awards is applicable in a vast majority of countries. So something like in the region of 150 countries are parties to this convention. If we could sort of move on to the next slide. So finally, in terms of the impact of Brexit on cases before English courts and maritime cases, for maritime claimants, one of the biggest attractions of litigating in London, or even actually going to arbitration in London, choosing London as the seat for arbitration in maritime disputes, is the availability of a number of injunctions. I have on the slide, I have noted anti-suit injunctions and freezing injunctions. Anti-suit injunctions are essentially court orders which restrain, they stop the defendant from commencing proceedings or continuing with some proceedings in another foreign jurisdiction, such as in Turkey, for example. Those proceedings may be commenced for legitimate reasons, in which case, of course, the injunction would not be granted, but they may also be commenced for illegitimate reasons in order to essentially harass the claimant and to try and extract a favorable settlement for the defendant. Freezing injunctions help a lot of maritime claimants to obtain some sort of pre-trial security. They essentially, as the name suggests, they are court orders which stop the defendant from dissipating their assets, from dealing with their assets, such as bank accounts, whether the bank accounts are located in England or if they're located in Turkey. We actually have even a very famous case involving a number of Turkish defendants who have been restrained by way of a worldwide freezing injunction from an English court, Motorola and Uzan case. So again, some of the cases that you will be looking to explore in your LLM. Following Brexit, there are question marks about the scope of the orders, such as anti-suit injunctions and freezing injunctions. Namely, I think the discussion here is a lot more positive for English lawyers. In essence, before Brexit, there were severe restrictions on the availability of anti-suit injunctions. It was not possible to grant an anti-suit injunction to stop a defendant from litigating in one of the EU member states. And that was one of the reasons, was the so-called doctrine of mutual trust, among others. They were supposed to trust the courts of other EU member states to deal with the dispute. And freezing injunctions were restricted to assets in England. So it was not easy for a claimant to obtain a freezing injunction, freezing assets in other EU member states.
There's also, Philip, I think your question has been answered. I think you answered the question addressed to your talk.
I can just sort of mention, since Betty mentions LMAA arbitration, that we work very closely with practitioners who are based in London, shipping practitioners. And the benefit of that is you get the advantage of, on a regular basis, practitioner seminars being delivered as guest lectures, essentially, in Southampton. Of course, this year it was online, but hopefully they will be coming in person to give lectures to students. And we, every single year, we have had the president of London Maritime Arbitrators Association give a lecture to our LLM students. We work very closely with him. I'm sure he would confirm that LMAA arbitration has not been affected at all by Brexit. In fact, quite the opposite, in that there's greater support now for arbitration because of greater availability of injunctions. So the fact that you can support that arbitration now with freezing injunctions and anti-suit injunctions in relation to either assets in EU or proceedings in EU means there'll be more incentive to choose LMAA arbitration.
Thank you, Philip. There are a couple of other questions. There's one question which I've almost missed by Erwa, who's interested in human rights and armed conflict law. Erwa, we are going to offer, we have suspended for a year our LLM in human rights and international law, but it will be offered in September 2022. So if you wait a year, I don't know when you were thinking of applying. Yes, we offer that. And in fact, there are two modules on the law on armed conflict. There are a number of modules on human rights more generally. So yes, this is on the books, although not from this September. There was one other question about whether one needs a PhD or doctor or have completed a doctorate program in the US. I don't think so. I think generally in law, actually PhDs are a prerequisite for an academic career, but most of our students very much expect and do go into industry, where the general expectation is that you have a master's degree, but you don't need a PhD. Rami, can you just put on the next slide? I think we've still had a couple of slides. Okay, so here there's a little bit more meat here on what type of modules we offer. So you can see there's a fair range, and you will get quite a lot of choice actually which maritime modules you want to do. Some of our students already have some experience and some academic credentials in some areas, but there should be something for everyone. And in a way you can already to some extent specialize in what you're really interested in. Dissertation topics are we supervise a lot of dissertations on very sort of cutting edge topics. I've put here just electronic bills of lading, autonomous shipping. You've heard about some of the autonomous shipping developments in Alexandra's talk, or on the use of blockchain technology in the shipping sector. So there is a lot of innovation happening. And of course, the law is challenged, as always. The law is always slightly behind in what's happening in on the technological front. Alexandra, did you cover? Yeah, you've covered the sort of career opportunities. Yeah. Rami, next slide, if there is one, and then we should basically also be finished. I think the expectation was this would be for an hour. Okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Sorry?
Thank you, Uta. Yeah, I think we're done with the slides. I just wanted to say a few things in regards to students other than the subject of the maritime law. I work for the international office, and as you may be aware, I do speak to lots of students who apply to us. So we do a lot of work with our excellent agents, British Education Bureau, who help us with assisting students. Just a little bit of information. I think I have maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Our campus, obviously Southampton, is a campus-based university. Maritime law, the Faculty of Law, is on our Harfield campus, which is the main campus. And obviously, as you would expect, it has all the facilities a Russell Group world-class university has. We provide financial support for students. So if you have an equivalent to a 3.3 out of 4 GPA, an excellent GPA, the Faculty of Law offer student scholarships for up to £3,000 for your master's degree. So you would need to check with BEB in regards to scholarship, or you can send me your details. I can always check with the faculty whether you'd qualify for a scholarship or not. Normal stuff that many universities would offer as students. We support our students. We have a dedicated student service center, enabling services. We offer a dedicated meet and greet service where we pick you up from the airport and we take you to your accommodation. And as well, we offer guaranteed accommodation for the duration that you're with us. In addition to that, students who come with a missing grade or 2 in English language, we can offer them a pre-sessional English language course, which takes over usually in the summer. Obviously now, given COVID, everything is online, but we're hoping that obviously the message we all want to get across is a positive one. And we're hoping that we're going to have you in person in September 2021. Halls of residence, just some examples of our halls. Careers destinations. Something very important for you as a student now is the fact that the post-study work visa allows you to stay in the UK for up to 2 years after you graduate. You don't have to have a job. It's a separate visa application, and you are allowed to stay for up to 2 years to look for a job. So that would enable you pretty much as well to connect with our Career Service Centre, who give advice to students about looking for jobs. We don't guarantee jobs, but we have lots of industrial links, and we can help connect you with specific companies or major employers in Southampton or in the UK. Year in employment, obviously this doesn't apply here, it's for undergrads, and a little bit of life on the campus. There's lots and lots of activities, 300 clubs and societies, every single society you can think of. There's trampolining society, golf, I think there's even a belly dancing society. So we help our students, get involved with our students in lots and lots of activities, and a very active Turkish student society. We currently have more than 52 Turkish students. I may have recognized one of our students who have come in the conversation. I'm not sure if Fatima, she does a PhD in law, PhD in engineering, I think, with us. And there's lots and lots of information about the city. So please do have a look online. There's a video, which obviously we don't have time to play, that I can play, but still a lovely city, close to London, as Uta mentioned. If you're into sailing, it's an ideal city. If you're into football as well and you watch football, I'm glad to say Southampton is in the Premier League. They've had a few defeats, but we were still hoping to be in the Premier League in the next coming year. Pretty much as well around the city, as you can see in the top corner, it has a lovely waterfront. The New Forest and the Isle of Wight are all major attractions of the city of Southampton, and our new established complex in the city centre, the West Gate, which Alex mentioned, is the West Quay area. It has a major shopping centre, as you can see in the winter. It's absolutely incredible. I broke a couple of bones on trying to ice skate, which is something it's not for me really, but do stay connected with us. There's lots of information online. We have a service called UniBuddy, where you can speak to students or academics, such as our lovely academics today who are with us, and ask them direct questions about the course of interest. So UniBuddy, University of Southampton, all the information is online, and obviously we have taken questions, but I can see here some questions lighting up. Thank you for your answer with maritime law. Brilliant, that's great to hear. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, and thank you very much. Obviously, BEB, Sevda, I'll stop sharing here, Imran and the team, thank you very much for a great event. Your efforts are incredible. Speak to BEB, counselors, advisors, they're brilliant people. They help you with anything related to the UK. And that's it pretty much from me.
Thank you very much to all of you. Hope to see you one day in Turkey. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sevda. Very soon. Thank
Bye,
you.
Alex. Bye, Philip. Bye-bye, Rami. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye now. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Thank you.